Hello and welcome to the Final Fantasy XIV Warrior Guide. In this guide I'll be covering the basics of the warrior rotation, abilities, utility and mitigation at level 90. A raid party in Final Fantasy consists of 2 tanks, 2 healers and 4 DPS. Warrior fills one of the tank spots in this party. It does so alongside Gunbreaker, Paladin and Dark Knight. Warrior focuses on building a resource called Beast Gauge. They can spend on powerful abilities and big bursts of damage. A good warrior will try to align these bursts of damage with the raid buffs of your party. Before going over the abilities and rotation of warriors, it's key to understand the job gauge first. Luckily, the warrior job gauge is very straightforward. The warrior job gauge consists of 2 main elements. The first is your Defiance indicator. Defiance greatly increases your enmity generated when active. If turned on, this is what your gauge will look like. If turned off, it will look like this. The second element is your Beast Gauge. This line gauge indicates how much Beast Gauge you have stored up to a maximum of 100. Warriors naturally have a lot of different abilities that focus either on mitigation or DPS. Let's talk about the DPS abilities first. The main filler Warrior has is a 1-2-3 combo which has 2 different finishers, either Storm's Eye or Storm's Path. The combo starts with Heavy Swing, a GCD with low potency. It combos into Main, which when comboed grants you 10 Beast Gauge. Finally, you can finish the combo with either Storm's Path or Storm's Eye. Storm's Path simply does a large chunk of damage and increases your Beast Gauge by 20 and restores some of your HP. Storm's Eye also does a large chunk of damage, however it only generates 10 Beast Gauge. In turn, it also grants you the Searching Tempest buff. This buff increases all damage dealt by 10% for the next 30 seconds. This buff can be stacked up to a maximum of 60 seconds and should be maintained at all times. Deciding on what finisher to use is fairly simple. If you have more than 50 seconds of your Searching Tempest buff, then use Storm Path. If you have less than 15 seconds on the buff, use Storm's Eye. For optimization, certain fights and phases might prefer you to go as low as 7 seconds or as high as 60 seconds. Next up we have your Gauge Spender, Felcleave. This ability deals a large amount of damage and uses 50 Beast Gauge on execution. Try to avoid overcapping on Beast Gauge by spending it on a Felcleave when your gauge is nearly full. However, do try to bring over as much Beast Gauge into the 2-minute raid buff windows as you can without overcapping. Your last single target GCD is called Tomahawk. This is a ranged attack which you can use to maintain uptime if you're ever forced to disconnect from the boss. This ability also has increased enmity generation. Alongside these GCDs, Warrior also has access to a bunch of OGCD abilities. Upheaval simply deals a moderate amount of damage on a 30-second cooldown. This ability should be used on cooldown to keep it aligned with raid buffs. Onslaught is your gap closer. It is worth noting that this does actually do some damage, so try to pull these for raid buff windows while still avoiding overcapping charges. Infuriate instantly grants you 50 Beast Gauge and a buff called Nascent Chaos, upgrading your next Felcleave into Inner Chaos. This version of Felcleaves guarantees a critical hit and direct hit, alongside having higher potency. The cooldown of Infuriate also gets reduced by 5 seconds by Felcleaves, Decimates and Chaotic Cyclones. Lastly, Inner Release puts your character in a rage-like trance and extends your Searching Tempest buff by 15 seconds. You will be granted a few things upon execution of this OGCD. First, you will gain a buff called Inner Release with 3 stacks. Each stack can be spent on a free usage of Felcleave. These stacks are not consumed if the Infuriate buff upgrades your Felcleave into Inner Chaos for its next use. Regular GCDs also do not consume the stacks, so feel free to use your 1-2-3 combo freely during this buff. Next up, you will gain a buff called Primal Rend Ready, allowing you access to the Primal Rend button. This is a GCD gap closer that does a high potency guaranteed critical direct hit to your target and all nearby enemies. This GCD does have an animation lock, so you will only be able to weave in a single OGCD at the end of this GCD. Try to avoid weaving in Onslaught here, as this is known to cause some funky business. Finally, it also grants you the Inner Strength buff, making you immune to stunts, sleeps, and most knockback effects. Be careful with this though, as some fights have mechanics where using a knockback is required to solve it, and your inner release could come off cooldown at precisely this time. Simply right-click the inner strength buff on your buff bar in this scenario to remove it. Naturally, Warrior has AoE versions of their single target abilities. You can start AoEing on 3 or more targets. Start off by using your 1-2 combo Overpower and Mithril Tempest instead of your 1-2-3 Storms combos. Do not worry about your Surging Tempest buff, as Mithril Tempest also applies this. On 3 or more targets, spend your Beast Gauge on Decimate instead of Felcleave, and also use Origami instead of Upheaval. Warrior has a few different openers, which can be useful for different kill times, phase timings, or gear sets. Most of these openers are outside of the scope of this guide, so we will only be talking about the all-round opener. This opener is good for catching party buffs and uses all your cooldowns as soon as possible. Start off by using Tomahawk half a second before the pull. Weave in Infuriate and start your 1-2-3 Storm's Eye combo. Use Heavy Swing and then Maim. Drink your Tincture after the Maim and then use Storm's Eye. Weave in Inner Release and get ready to do your burst. Use your upgraded Felcleave, Inner Chaos, and weave in Upheaval and Onslaught. Use your Primal Rend and weave in another Infuriate. Use your upgraded Felcleave, Inner Chaos, and weave in Onslaught again. Use another Felcleave and weave in another Onslaught. Now use 2 more Felcleaves before starting another 1-2-3 combo, finishing with Storm's Path this time. Use Felcleave and weave in Infuriate. Use your upgraded Felcleave, Inner Chaos. This is used here so it fits in at the end of your Tincture. Start one last 1-2-3 combo, Heavy Swing into Maim, weave in Upheaval, and then finish your opener off with Storm's Eye. The reason why we wait to use our OGCDs until the 4th GCD is because we have to wait for the party to deploy their buffs. By waiting, we use our most damaging abilities into set rate buffs and in turn do more damage ourselves. Here's an example of the opener being done. After the opener, simply maintain your 1-2-3 combo, finish with Storm's Eye if your Searching Tempest has less than 15 seconds left, and finish with Storm's Path if your Searching Tempest buff has more than 15 seconds left. Ensure your cooldowns do not overcap by using them before they would do so, and try to pull as many cooldowns and resources into the 2-minute rate buff windows as possible. Inner Release can simply be used on cooldown and it will naturally stay aligned. Infuriate you try to pull for 2-minute rate buffs, whilst using them occasionally earlier to avoid overcapping. Onslaught can be used once in between each 2-minute rate buff windows. After, hold on to them so you have free charges for the next 2-minute rate buff windows. Upheaval can simply be used on cooldown and will stay aligned with rate buff windows. Warrior, as a tank, brings a large amount of mitigation to be able to shield themselves from hard-hitting tank busters and to aid the party with single target and rate-wide mitigation abilities. Let's talk about these abilities. Thrill of Battle increases your maximum hit points by 20% and increases the amount of hit points you receive from healing actions by 20%. Vengeance reduces all damage taken by 30% and hits enemies attacking you for a small amount of potency for each physical hit they deal to you. This hit is insignificant in raid content, however, in dungeon, this cooldown can deal a lot of damage to trash mobs in between bosses. Holmgang is your invulnerability. Simply put, this ability makes your character so angry that they refuse to die. For the next 10 seconds, no attacks will be able to reduce your character's hit points below 1. This invulnerability is the invulnerability with the shortest cooldown in the game and gets used most often out of these invulnerabilities. Equilibrium restores a large amount of hit points to yourselves, as well as applying a moderate regen. Blood Wetting reduces all damage taken by 20% for the first 4 seconds and 10% for the last 4 seconds. It also lets you heal yourself for a moderately high amount of potency with each GCD used within the 8 seconds buff. Lastly, it creates a moderately potent barrier around you. Blood Wetting also shares its recast time with Nascent Flash. Nascent Flash can be put on a target party member. The affected player and the warrior will get healed for a moderate amount of potency with each GCD hit the warrior uses. Additionally, for the targeted player, it also reduces all damage taken by 20% for the first 4 seconds and 10% for the last 4 seconds. Lastly, it grants the target a moderately potent barrier, shielding them from a decent amount of damage. These two abilities are naturally very similar. Try to use Blood Wetting if you want the mitigation yourself, and Nascent Flash if you wish to grant it to a struggling party member or your co-tank when they're taking a tank buster. Shake It Off creates a barrier around yourself and all party members that shield them for 15% of their maximum HP. You can increase this effect by using Thrill of Battle, Vengeance or Blood Wetting beforehand. Doing so consumes the buffs but increases the potency of the barrier by 2% of their maximum HP for each buff consumed. Lastly, Defiance is your tank stance. This ability greatly increases the amount of enmity generated when active. Aside from these abilities, Warrior also gains access to the tank roll action. Shirk sends 25% of your current enmity to a targeted party member. This ability is used for swapping the main enmity of a target. For ease of use, a lot of tanks use a macro to do this without targeting their off tank. It is worth noting that macros cannot be action queued and thus you might have to spam the button. Provoke instantly generates a large amount of enmity and you can use this in combination with Shirk to ensure an enmity swap with your co-tank. The amount of enmity generated from Provoke is affected by your tank stance Defiance. Low Blow stuns a target. Interject interrupts a target's action or cast. Arm's Length is your knockback immunity. This ability can also serve a second purpose. You can use it during trash pulls in dungeons to slow down the attack speed of anyone attacking you by 20%, reducing the damage you take from them. Lastly, there are a few things I wish to mention that didn't fit into any specific category, but I still believe are important to mention. If you have high ping, it might be difficult to prevent clipping GCDs or double weaving. This makes the job perform significantly worse. However, there are a few ways to deal with this. For PC users, you can use No Clippy or FFXIV Alexander to increase the spell queue window. For both PC users and console users, you can use a VPN to get a better route to the server, possibly reducing your ping that way. For more information, check the Balance Discord. FFXIV Analysis is a useful tool to help you analyze your rotation. Simply put in your FF logs report to see what you can improve upon. I recommend using this frequently while learning the job. A special thanks to everyone who helped out making this video. Their names and social links are on screen right now.